Hi guys, I'm here today to review 3 books by the amazing Sarah Moss. So I'm going to do my usual thing of telling you what the books are about, what I enjoyed or perhaps didn't enjoy about each of the books, and then also I'm going to touch on the fact that these 3 are viewed as a loose trilogy. Whenever I mention these books on my channel or on Goodreads, people always say, what order should I read them in? So I'm going to touch on the order I read them in and the order I would recommend reading them in order to get the best out of them, really. So the first one is Nightwaking. This was published in 2011 and this is a contemporary novel. So this follows 2 academics, our protagonist being the wife, Anna, as they move to a remote Scottish island so the husband can study puffins there. Now, the husband has inherited an estate on this island, so his family have lived on this island for generations and sort of lorded it over the working class inhabitants of the island. So they've gone there to study the puffins and she's gone there to continue to do her research on her area of academia, which is childcare through the ages. So she studies childcare, the way children were viewed and raised, particularly during the Victorian era compared to the present day. So this novel is heavily focused on motherhood as a theme because they have 2 very young sons, and Anna, our protagonist, is trying to battle with being a mother and what that means to her as an individual, as well as battle with writing this big academic text on motherhood. So Anna's an incredibly interesting character. I love the way Sarah Moss studies gender norms, gender roles and the expectations of gender, and this novel tackles that, you know, in one of the best ways out of any novels I've ever read. And that's because Anna is really an outlier in some way. She didn't want to be a mother, she doesn't feel a great benefit to being a mother, and while she acknowledges that she deeply loves her children, she doesn't feel like she needs them to complete her life. The other part of this novel, which really drives the plot forward and becomes an obsession of Anna's, is that very early on in the novel, a skeleton is found in the garden when Anna is digging with her children in the garden, and the skeleton is of a very young child. So an investigation begins into where this skeleton is from, and very quickly it's realised the skeleton is very old. So the investigation continues, and there is obviously a concern that this skeleton could be linked to the family, to Anna's husband's family, because his family have owned this area of land for generations. So Anna becomes very obsessed with this skeleton, this child, and she becomes very obsessed with the history of the island. So it's really a battle between Anna's obsession with her field of academia, that being motherhood, then her battle with her children and how much she loves them but how much pressure them even existing is putting her under, and then also this battle with this child and why this child is there, and, you know, the history of childcare on this island. Now this is a fictional island, but it's very heavily based on the story of St Kilda, which some of you may know. So it's a phenomenal novel. I think I'm not a mother, and I think perhaps some mothers may find this difficult to read. There's moments in this novel where you feel an intense sense of fear that Anna is falling over the abyss and is going to do something bad to her children because of the pressure she's under. It's an excellent novel, and the way it's linked to these other 2 is that within the story, the sort of when Anna is studying the island historically and who this skeleton could possibly be, she finds some old letters in the house, and these letters are from a nurse who was sent to the island to assist with birthing of children and the rearing of children on the island with the local inhabitants. And throughout the novel these letters are interspersed, so you're getting Anna's present day story, but you're also finding out what happened to this nurse in the late 1800s. So that's Nightwaking. I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was one of my favourite novels of last year. It's absolutely phenomenal and I will 100% reread it, and I think I'm going to try and reread it quite soon because I just really loved it, and it's one of those books I couldn't put down. I think I read it in like 1 or 2 sittings. I just absolutely adored it, and her writing style, as always, is just phenomenal. So there's that one. So on to the next one. So Is A Bloat was published in 2014, and this follows one family in the second half of the 1800s. So it begins in 1856, I believe, with the marriage of a young couple. The husband is a fairly acclaimed artist who's sort of gathering fame as we go, and his wife, who's been raised in a very strict evangelical family. Now, early on in the novel, they have 2 daughters, and it really follows the lives of these 2 daughters over around 25 years. So this novel's only 300 pages long, and this novel is structured in such a way that on each new chapter we get a description of a painting. Now, the painting usually features one of the daughters. They're very heavily painted by their father. And also, their father's closest friend is a fairly renowned painter. So he's a very important character in the novel, and so these paintings are either by the father or by this friend, Amberley. And that means that because we follow 25 years and 300 pages, we have to skip a lot. So this novel, I don't really want to spoil too much, but effectively, very early on in the novel, when this mother has her daughters, she suffers extreme postnatal depression, which isn't really recognised in the novel, but as a modern day reader you can see that's what it is. And she was raised in a very, very strict religious family where everything she did was very heavily analysed, and she becomes a very cruel, unbearable woman. And she really is the driving force of the novel, whilst the older daughter Ali is really our protagonist and we follow her throughout most of the novel. The person who affects the lives of the most people in this novel is the mother. And it's difficult because when you get to a certain point in this novel you despise her. I mean, she does awful things to these children. There is moments of the mental abuse is to the utmost, but there is also moments of physical abuse that are difficult to read. And you despise her, but equally, you know, I feel like you could have had a whole book on her upbringing and that wouldn't have been nice either. So it's a really complex relationship that we deal with here. Now, this is set in a time when women are trying to enter academia. It's around the time of the Edinburgh Seven. So the daughters are brought up by their mother mainly, who's a philanthropist, in a very bizarre way really. She likes to help working class families, but she's not very nice about it. And so the daughters are raised to do this, and really we follow their life with the art world, with their father and Amberley, and then they're completely, you know, that life is one filled with luxury and wealth and beauty. And then the life of their mother is the complete opposite. You know, if they want to eat anything nice or wear anything nice or look at anything nice, she thinks that's an abomination because there's people who are starving and so you shouldn't enjoy anything ever in the world. And we follow Ali and May as they grow up and choose their career paths. That's really all I want to say because I don't want to really spoil too much. What I will say is this book, in terms of historical fiction, is phenomenal. Its focus on the working class at the time, the incredibly poor or non-existent social services at the time in the UK. Also the focus on academia and a woman's place in academia, and there's a very heavy focus on medicine, doctors and nurses, and a woman's place in that field as well. So I gave this book 3 stars, which is low for me to give a Sarah Moss book. Reasoning for that is I think the themes in this, in the historical context, is phenomenal. Absolutely amazing. I think the characters are amazing, but I think we get too little in, you know, 25 years of history. I feel like I'd rather this book was double the length or even bigger and we got more moments in their life, because the problem is that we'd find out loads about their lives in like a 6-month period and then we jump 5 years, and so I felt a real loss of connection. I felt like part of me felt like Sarah Moss was trying to use this book to talk about a lot of themes during this time period and all the things I mentioned, and it felt partly like the characters were a crutch to to tell these themes, and that skipping big elements of their story all the time meant that you couldn't be as connected to them as characters themselves, and so I was more connected to learning about the history. So I still really enjoyed this book, but I don't think it's one of her better ones, and I think she could have spent more time on the characters so they didn't just feel like a crutch for the overall themes. So there's that one. Now, Science for Lost Children was published the year after in 2015, and it's structured in an entirely different way. So, completely non-spoilery, as this is set a bit later. It follows some members of the same family, but it's completely differently structured. We have about just under a year, I'd say, in the story of these people. We follow a man and a woman, and we get alternating chapters from each of them. They're in completely different parts of the world, and again we have this discussion of, you know, these two worlds. One is art and the beauty of art and the enjoyment of art and culture and all these wonderful things, and then the other is the discussion of medicine, of the working class, poor social care and feminism. And completely the same themes but handled in a really different way, because the way the story is much more condensed. As I say, it's the story of 1 year. We're following these characters in a much more detailed fashion, and the story is set in slightly different locations. So half of the story is set in Cornwall and the other person's storyline is set in Japan. The storyline in both locations is beautiful. The descriptions of, you know, Japan in the 1880s was perfection, incredibly lyrical, a beautifully written book. I would say this is the best examination of an internal mental health struggle that I've ever read. So I gave this novel 4 out of 5 stars. The reason I knocked a star off is two things really. One is I preferred the storyline in Cornwall. I found that the storyline in Japan didn't have as much happening in it, and whilst I loved it, there was a lot more happening in the storyline in Cornwall. I felt much more interested in the themes, and so therefore when there's a novel that has different narratives, if I really want to be reading one over the other, I think that's a slight flaw. I think you should want to read them equally. And the other thing is that there's moments in this novel where you're building up to big scenes, and then Sarah Moss decides to skip those big scenes and to pick up the narrative a little bit after they've finished happening, so you miss them. And that's something I struggle with a little bit, because I'd have rather had those big scenes actually on the page for me to read. Still, really loved it. It's a phenomenal book and I'd highly recommend it. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. So how are they linked? Well, the letters in this novel from the nurse in the 1800s are from a family member from these books. So, if you read this novel first, you find out a lot about the family before you've ever met them. But I would recommend you do read this first, because what I noticed is, when going back and looking through this novel in order to do this review, is that I don't think Sarah Moss had completely decided to write these two books when she wrote this one, or if she had, she hadn't fully fleshed out what she was going to do with the characters. And the reason I say that is because some of the things that are written in these letters are incorrect compared to what you read here. So sometimes she'll write to characters as though they're at a certain location or doing a certain thing, or sometimes she'll describe some of the characters and the way they are, and it's not correct compared to these books. So I think you could read these first, and actually it would mean that you weren't spoiled on what happened to the person on the island. But I think if you read these and really got to know this family in detail and then read Nightwaking, you'd probably be a bit annoyed when you read the letters, because you'd be like, well, that's wrong. If you read this first, you won't pick up on the things that are wrong because you don't know the family in detail yet. And then you'll go to this and get to know how the character in the letters got to that point, and get to know this family really, really well. So that's what I'd recommend. Some people I know have read these in the wrong order. You could read this as a standalone and what it would mean is that you'd have spoiled this entire story for yourself. You'd have spoiled the first sort of 25 years of the sisters' lives, and you wouldn't pick up on all the nuances of the characters' relationships, but you'd completely understand the narrative. It's explained enough in here that you know what was happening. So if you just like the sound of this one, you can just read this one, or you can just read these two and skip the first 25 years of their lives. But you know, I think you'd miss out because you'd miss out on the nuances. So I'd personally recommend reading them in publication order, which is of course Nightwaking, Bodies of Light, and then Science for Lost Children. So thank you for watching. This is probably really long and rambly. Do let me know if you've read any of these books or if you're planning to, and also I'd love recommendations for non-fiction books about all the themes I just discussed are present in these novels, because I really love learning about medicine and mental health care and the social situation during the late 1800s in England, and I'd love to know more about it. So I've been trying to look up books to pick up and struggling to find ones that are sort of really acclaimed or, you know, well reviewed. So please do feel free to give me some recommendations down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!